this presentation, I don't particularly want to dwell on the politics and what's happening in that space. I really want to be talking about how Yass Valley Council and the Yass community wants to look at using this document as a really interesting suite of documents to build on our revised settlement strategy. So I'm just going to take a bit of time to talk through what Yass is all about, where we're located. I know most of you know, but we'll give you a bit more information. It's good for me. I've only been in the region for 6 months, so I need refreshers every now and again. So a lot of our work is very much focused on the Yass River itself. It's the main river that travels through our populated areas. Obviously, we have the Murrumbidgee down in the very southern corner of our LGA. We've got the Goodrabidgee as well, not far from there. But it's Yass River that really provides the single biggest focal point to the river network for our community. And chief reason for that is it's where our water comes from. We've got a dam on the Yass River. That's where Yass Township and Murrumbateman get their water from, and Bynalong. I can't forget Bynalong. That's where those communities get their water from. So we have a very intrinsically linked role within the catchment. But as I mentioned, this is more looking about how the strategic planning piece really talks to this document, and a bit of a where are we now, so we can understand what's happening in the region, what's happening in our LGA, and how much of an important factor water resourcing and water access is for strategic planning. So under our current settlement strategy, which is getting on a bit now, it did look at what our capacity was for future residential growth, and realistically, we've got enough water to look after our current residential zone lands and about 600 more lots in Murrumbateman. We're at close to the end of the line for our water resources. As I mentioned, the water for these urban areas solely comes from Yass Dam. For our rural residential and larger rural properties, they're all dependent on rainwater for their water supply. So one thing that we really need to do in this conversation about what the new settlement strategy will look like is how we create resilience and how we drought-proof our community to allow for a future sustainable growth in this area. This also means that our overall population predictions that predated COVID, that predated a load of those global megatrends that have so much of an impact on strategic planning, needs to be re-looked at. So as I mentioned, Yass Dam in rude health at that point in time is that real focus point of what we're looking at. So we have a settlement strategy that dates back to 2017. It's nearly 10 years old. The work was done in 2015 and 2016. It establishes a total future growth for the local government area of 28,000 people by 2036. It also notes that the prime constraint to growth is water. We have land, we have the ability to grow, we have areas that are suitable for growth. What we don't have is an ongoing and suitable connection to a residential and urban land water supply. This document also looks at limiting development around the villages of Bynalong, Bowning, Bookham, also Wee Jasper, and also has a bit more of a modest growth around Sutton and Gundaroo, noting that they've got a really important village character, that they have a area that needs to be protected. And one thing it does do is sets the framework for future growth. So it sets the framework for future review of the document as well. So it's not a static document. It acknowledges there needs to be reviews in this space. One of the other documents that's really vital in this space is our water sourcing strategy. So this is a document that was finalised in 2022, and it looks at how the water source strategy looks at how the local government area will source its water into the future, and it ranks the different options that we have. And the two highest ranked options in that space were a potential pipeline from Hall to Murrumbateman to link into the existing Yass to Murrumbateman pipeline. The second was potentially examining Burrinjuck Dam as a water source option. So this is a document that dates from 2022. But it's a document that also needs review, and I'll be touching on that later in this presentation. So we're working towards a new settlement strategy. And I will preface this by saying that this is incredibly early stages to be talking about a new document, but there's so many interesting foundations to discuss that it's good to have this conversation now, and I'll probably would like to come back and do a check-in in about 12 to 18 months' time to tell you how it all ended up. We've only just engaged a consultant to undertake this work, but they've already been provided with this document as an important piece of the puzzle that they're working on. So we need to recognise that we have significant growth pressures, and they come from your traditional growth. Under the New South Wales Government's common planning assumptions, we have a growth figure of 0.9% per annum. That's higher than, say, Wagga Wagga, which is sitting at 0.5% per annum. So it is quite a high growth figure predicted by the state government. But also we're looking outside that and looking at what the broader regional growth, particularly coming from the ACT, looks like. And we acknowledge that there will be a potential diversion of some of the ACT population as we provide a housing option that isn't as readily accessible within the ACT. So talking about larger lots, detached housing, things like that, as the ACT moves towards a more denser urban building form. So we need to look at the document in that light as well. But also we really need to be looking at that document in terms of how it aligns to the provision of infrastructure and making sure we've got that alignment between future growth and water servicing. If we're predicting a population growth, but we don't have the water for it, we need to be constructing that argument of what water resourcing looks like in this context. So we've got some really interesting opportunities in this space. We're going to be looking at strategic growth corridors. They're those new development areas that open up new areas for consideration. And I'm not talking just greenfield development with 500 square metre lots and row to row of monument grey roofs which create a horrible heat sink. Trust me, I've done strategic planning at Maitland City Council and I know what that looks like. That's something that we really need to be actively looking as different options around there. We also need to be looking at what employment growth looks like and what employment generating land uses look like. The worst thing a council like Yass, in a position such as Yass can be, is a dormitory suburb. One of those suburbs that people just go to sleep, and then they drive 45 minutes to an hour away to work, and they never really engage with their local community. We need to be making sure we're doing planning that creates a sense of community as well. So as part of that, we're looking at what better upfront communication and engagement looks like in this space. Rather than us preparing a document in isolation, we're approaching key stakeholders before we even put pen to paper to start that conversation about what that looks like. It also means that we can right some of the wrongs that we have done in the past. I won't get too far into it because I'm a strategic planning nerd and you'll all fall asleep and it'll be awkward for everyone else. I am really passionate about contribution planning. That's a snappy title if ever heard one. So really, I'm focusing on making sure that we get an appropriate allocation from developers to ensure that critical infrastructure is funded appropriately as part of development. That hasn't really happened to date in Murrum-Bateman, and moving forward it will need to happen in Murrum-Bateman so we can provide that critical infrastructure piece. Also, it's interesting to look at our villages, particularly Bowning. It's about 10 minutes away from Yass. It's a really interesting community. There's loads of very historic buildings there, but it's also pretty forgotten about. And it'd be really good to do a bit of a piece on what really effective heritage-focused infill development looks like in that space to get some good outcomes. So I'll just move on to talk more about water and then move into how the guidelines are going to be influencing this document. Because the water sourcing strategy is about 4 years old now, we aren't reflecting some changes that have occurred in terms of alternative solutions that may present themselves and things like that. This document will be reviewed alongside our settlement strategy. The two documents are intrinsically linked and need to be looked at as a holistic piece. And I think that's a really important move for local governments, not just Yass, to make. We need to be looking at all the different foundations that we have to guide strategic planning to make sure we are doing an appropriate job for our community and making sure that when people come to the area, existing residents are the ones that are left footing the bill, essentially. So the water strategy will inform the settlement strategy, and the settlement strategy will inform the water strategy. And what's really important in this space is it then creates that front-loaded body of work to enable us to go and talk to federal and state government in particular to talk about what infrastructure provision looks like, so we can actually begin that process rather than just hoping that something will occur. So with all that in mind, I'm going to move into looking at the actual the guidelines themselves and how we can begin to look at them in the process of the work that Yass Valley Council is undertaking in conjunction with Guide Consulting, who are our consultants in this space. So I'm not going to rehash all the actual policy frameworks. I'm going to talk about how we've given the first consideration to how these documents can be actually worked on. And previous to even this policy starting, one area that Yass has acknowledged that we need to do better and it has made real positive steps in is in actually working with traditional landowners in our LGA. There was a poor relationship. We are really working to rebuild that relationship. We've got actual working groups established now. We're having proper conversations. And the conversations that we've had this morning prompted me to reach out to one of our key stakeholders, the CEO of the LAUC there, to kickstart the conversations we had at the start of the year around looking at what ecological and culturally appropriate flows look like for Yass River. So taking away these things from these conferences is so important. We all have many things on our mind, and these conversations are so important to remind us of the things that we need to be looking at. So things like that are really important. Making the initial connections and talking to the people involved to get them at the table to have the conversation about how we can properly look at land and country, how they can be heard, how can they be respected. One thing that's also really important when we're looking at these kind of documents is ensuring that country is actually respected. So one thing that's really vital, and it's one thing I've worked on elsewhere, is looking at how we can utilise things like biodiversity corridors, vegetation areas, land zoning outcomes, things like that, to actually incorporate important landscape features, parts of songlines, all those kind of things into a protected space utilising the most boring of all things, planning legislation. So it's about really reaching out and engaging in that space and working through to find areas that are important for a wide community as well, and ensuring that both the cultural heritage but also visual amenity and the reasons why people move to regional areas are protected. So it's really important that we look at how we can deal with the legislation we have in front of us and use that as a framework to get better outcomes across the board. So that's also looking at how we work with key stakeholders. So not just, as I said, putting a document out and saying, tell us what you think, saying noted to the submissions, actually creating a framework where people can tell us what they think the growth looks like over the next 15 to 20 years. So we can actually begin that conversation, work out what's important to different stakeholders, different community groups, and acknowledge that there is going to be these very broad and often very competing priorities in this space, and acknowledging the role of local council of sometimes being the bad guy that keeps all parties unhappy for a broader positive outcome. It's unfortunate, but sometimes the best you can hope for in strategic planning is everyone is unhappy, because that means everyone has had to compromise somewhere. We also need to look at how we can actually do sustainable settlement and what regional development looks like in a sustainable context. And that's really where that natural resource piece comes in. So acknowledging those competing priorities I mentioned, actually building on the really strong existing regional approach that is there. There are so many really positive cross-border and regional groups such as this that are such an important part of the piece of how we can actually fit together as a region and plan appropriately for the region, because most people don't care where local government boundaries are. It's largely irrelevant to their life. It's about respecting that broader region and creating better experiences for residents across the board, because what benefits Queanbeyan often benefits Yass, often benefits Canberra. It's about respecting that really strong regional approach and getting really positive outcomes in that space. So as I mentioned, looking at how that community and landscape is dealt with, and then finally looking at a healthy and adaptive catchment. We really need to be planning for positive environmental outcomes. If we don't, we're not fulfilling our duty as decision makers. We really need to be ensuring that what we are putting forward leaves a better place than what we started with, and making sure that we're advocating for that and really working with those really important community groups, members of the community and community members that are sometimes marginalised in these conversations to get those outcomes. Thank you very much.